Welcome back, everyone. I am also welcoming back Sharon Eagen. Sharon is our certified educational therapist, our cognitive coach, and our Feuerstein trainer as well. So Sharon, welcome back.
Thanks, Dori.
Well, Sharon, I know that your educational background is vast, and I really am curious as to what it is that causes a sense of disconnect between the parents and the teachers and the school. What is it that parents are experiencing?
You know, it's really interesting. I spent many years as a classroom teacher, but as a mother of 5 adult children, I spent many years on the other side of the table as well. And so when I think about that, even though I had both roles, there were times where it was a challenge to kind of bridge that relationship across that kind of divide that exists. And I think that one of the reasons it exists is there's kind of this unknown. If you're a parent who isn't a teacher or doesn't work in a school, you don't really have a sense of how to navigate that as an adult. You only have your childhood experience. And as a child, you would probably have not asked some questions that you want to ask as an adult, and you have a totally different perspective. So it's a little bit of a fear of the unknown, right? Because you don't know what you don't know. And yet you are entrusting the most precious thing you have, your children, to this person. And so there's this little bit of uncertainty and there's a lot of emotion, right? We want to protect our kids. As a former kindergarten teacher, we would talk a lot on that first day of school about helping kids transition, but I was always way more worried about the parents, particularly moms, if it was their first and oldest child coming to school. That was big. That was big. And so it's really, there's a lot of emotion that's involved there. And you just don't know what you don't know. And I think that leads to this sense of this big divide, and I don't know how to cross it. What's the right thing to do? Because I don't know what I don't know.
So Sharon, I'm going to admit this. Sharon was my son's kindergarten teacher, and it was his first schooling experience per se. And I remember leaving the classroom. She was so gracious, made sure we were good, but swept him away quickly so that the cut was made. And I remember going to the car and crying all the way home, and getting home and looking at his stuff and crying again. And he came home and he loved it. And I was sort of mad at him for loving it because I was just so broken up, and he was fine. But you do have kind of like that sense of what's going to happen. Can I trust this person? Even though you can, you still have that thought. Right, is he going to be okay? Is he going to survive the day? What's going to happen? And he was great. So Sharon, when parents are in a situation where they're feeling just like they're divided from the school, why should they take the initiative to try to bridge that gap and just kind of understand the social situations at school?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Dori. Because sometimes it's really easy to avoid those things that are hard for us, right? Especially as parents, we've got so much going on. It's easy to just say, I'm sure they've got it. No news is good news. If I'm not hearing anything, then everything must be okay, right? And we put our energy elsewhere. So when I think about what makes it worth putting in the work to bridge the divide, the first thing that comes to mind is that it makes it really a positive learning experience for your child, emotionally, socially. We know that if kids are struggling socially or emotionally, it impacts their ability to learn. And so if you can model for them a positive relationship with school, then that's really a good thing for them. So even if they're feeling hesitant maybe they've got a new teacher this year. Kids assume things about their teachers, right? Excuse me, like, he doesn't like me, she doesn't like me, misinterprets things. When a parent can make the effort to build a positive relationship with that teacher, then that says to their child, this is a good person I can trust. If my mom and dad trust them, if they are connected to them, then your child's going to feel safer. And so they are going to have a better learning experience and just a better overall experience. And then the other thing that's really important is that we think we know our kids, but just like us, children are different in different contexts, right? I mean, we have our professional selves, we have ourselves that we are at home with our kids, we have ourselves that we're out with friends. We're not exactly the same in all of those situations, and our children aren't either. So as a teacher, I would often hear, well, they never did that at home. That's not a problem at home. And that might be true, but it's important that this big chunk of their life at school, we understand who they are in that context as well. And so by building that relationship with that teacher, you can better understand your own child. Like I said, I have 5 grown children, and there were times now, I know as my children are adults, they love to come back and tell me stories of things that happened in school, and even situations where I went toe to toe with a teacher, and now I know I was wrong and that teacher was right. And so that it's really important to have that relationship, because children, while they're different in different situations, they have a different perspective in interpreting things, and they might not be fully honest. I know we want to think that kids are, but they're not always. And so it might be a different perspective. It might be them just protecting themselves and knowing there's this disconnect. And if they know that home and school don't communicate, then it allows them to do things they might not otherwise be able to do. If they know that you're on board with a teacher, with a school, then it becomes more unified. That doesn't happen as much. And so I think there's a lot of reasons to do that. It's a huge part of their lives, right? They're there several hours every day. You want to have a sense and a connection to that. So it's really important. The last thing I'll add with that is that, as a mom, if you love my kids, I've got your back. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Even if you and I wouldn't normally be best friends, if you love kids, I'm gonna support you. So there's that piece of it as well. So I think it's important to bridge that divide.
So do you think parents can be over involved? I mean, we're encouraging them to establish a connection with the teachers, but sometimes it seems like, and I think I was guilty, that's why I'm asking, we can want to help too much.
Yeah. I think it's possible to be over involved, very rarely. And when you talk about over involved, I think more of parents who are trying to navigate the relationship for their child. Mm-hmm. So as our kids get older, it's really important that if they have a conflict with a teacher, that they're handling that conflict. If we're going in and handling it for them, then what we're doing is a couple things. One, we're not helping them build the skills to handle conflict in social and professional situations. And we're doing it from our perspective. We don't usually have all the facts. And so I think in that way you can be over involved. But in terms of like being supportive of a school, supporting a teacher, I think that the only time where you would really be over involved is if you start to want to leverage that relationship. It's like, well, I brought you coffee, my child should get special treatment. If you're thinking it's a transaction, then that's not really building a relationship, right? So I would say that those would be the situations in which you might be over involved. And those are rare. And so you really want to be careful and check your own motivation in doing what you do in building that relationship. That's interesting. I never would have thought of you as being over involved, but in either of those situations. But being a presence, that's not a bad thing.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't bring you any coffee either.
It's okay. I never drank coffee, so we're all good. We're all good.
And I would think that having your parent would allow the child to feel a little bit more confident, a little bit more like they could trust the school in general, versus having a parent that maybe is keeping themselves at a distance and not wanting to interfere completely or be a part of things. And like you said, like they're two different worlds then.
Absolutely. And along with that, Dori, is that it's really important for parents to know not all the specifics of what's going on in the family, but just that there may be something going on in the family. So whether it's parents having a difficult time in the relationship, you don't need to tell the ins and outs of that, but letting teachers know that the family is going through some type of transition really helps a teacher interpret a child's emotional responses and the things that are happening. We can show a lot of grace, right? Or if, a grandparent's ill, or parents have been traveling, any of those things that seem like it's not a big deal impact kids. And so having a good relationship with teachers where you can say, I just want you to know that, my dad's been sick and in the hospital this week. And so Susie's been stressed about that. And so it's important to have that type of relationship and bridge that divide. There really aren't two different worlds. Our kids don't segment them in that same way. Their emotions are going to come to the surface regardless of where those emotions are coming from. So I think that's another reason it's really important to set up that relationship.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think if you knew as a teacher what was going, maybe not specifics like you said, but knew they were having issues, then it would probably allow you to have a little more patience and kind of understand that the child is struggling elsewhere. So that's very important.
Absolutely. And even as children get older, we might think of that when they're younger, that we need to let a teacher know that. But even in high school, as a teacher, you can say, what, I'm not going to push this deadline with this student because I know what's going on in their family right now. Or I can have grace in my expectations in other areas. Or a student falls asleep in class. Well, if I know that they've been taking care of young siblings because mom is taking care of a father, there's lots of things I can have a lot of grace for and interpret them in a different way if I have just a little bit of information.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And is there a way that parents can help their kids adjust to school? Maybe it's books, literature, again, things that they can help empathize with the situation a little bit?
I think there's lots of ways to do that. There are a lot of books that are written for younger kids about adjusting to school. But I think that really even before that, when you think about making connections to the child's teacher that we are talking about, I think books can help our kids understand that teachers are people and that we as parents need to understand that sometimes we forget they're just like everybody else. And so if we respond in an emotional way, they're going to have an emotional response. Yes, they're professionals and they might keep it under wraps, but there's still going to be an emotional response if they're feeling attacked or if they're being faced with something that They feel like people aren't understanding. And I think that we can use books and literature to help kind of help our kids understand that when we see characters who are in school contexts, I think like of upper elementary students, and there are authors that write about different school contexts. And that when we have those stories, when we talk about those stories with our kids, we can talk about how that compares to what they do, how they interact with their friends, how they interact with their teacher, how they view their teacher. We can have conversations with them about that. And I think that's as important when you're having those conversations as parents, that we remember that it's our child's perspective. Mm-hmm. I know as a teacher, I would often say to parents when they would come to me with, Susie said such and such happened. And I would remind them. Now, for me, I was a teacher of, 5, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds. I would say, now remember, that's the perspective of, a 6-year-old. Let me tell you what happened from my perspective. And I would always say to them, I will not believe everything your child says about you if you don't believe everything your child says about me. Because they come with interesting stories sometimes, just from their perspective. They're seeing one side of the story. So when you're reading books and having conversations with your kids, it helps you get a sense of what their perspective is of a situation like that. And so I think there's lots of ways to use literature to do that, to use books to help you make those adjustments, and I think that's one of the things I love about the work that you do, Dori, is that it gives kids a voice. And I often think, especially with young children who are adjusting, the idea of having parents write books with their kids, mm-hmm. have their kids write stories about what happened in school that day, draw pictures, and even do that together, as you could do kind of like what school was like for me as a parent when I went to school, and what school is like for them, and talk about those differences. And I think that can be really helpful. So there is a lot of ways to use literature. I do just want to say one thing, going back to making really meaningful connections with teachers. Sure. And I can't say this enough. No social media. Do not put your concerns and questions out on social media. Just consider, from a teacher's perspective, how that feels. Consider yourself as a professional, whatever profession you might have. Let's say you're a dentist. What would it be like if you had a patient who had one bad interaction and started putting that out on social media? What would that do to others' confidence in you? What would that do to your confidence in yourself? And so always go to the teacher first. That's, a really important thing. So I'm just seeing more and more of that. And it's kind of heartbreaking because it devastates the relationship, not just between the parent and the teacher, but between the children. And so, yeah, avoid social media. Not the place to handle any conflict or any questions that you have. Go to the teacher.
Is there a better way, a better time of day? What is the best way to address issues that you're concerned about with teachers?
It's a really good question. The first thing I would say is email is probably the best way to make an initial contact. Teachers don't have opportunity to necessarily get on the phone during the day. So email is a good way to make that initial contact, and you can set up an appointment for a phone call, for a meeting, or if you feel like it's something that can just be handled on email, that's fine. And I would always start with, my child is concerned about such and such. Could you give me your perspective on the situation? Mm-hmm. So rather than dealing with like all the emotion of it, think about the actual events. So when you're thinking about a problem, the first thing you want to do is think about, okay, what's all the information I have about the problem? And then by having all the information, you can think about what the actual problem is. The problem that your child thinks is the problem may not be what the real problem is. It could be a simple miscommunication, a misunderstanding, any number of things. So I would start there. I would also start by assuming the best. And that's true whether it's your child's teacher or anybody else, right? We go into conflict, you should assume the best of the other person to begin with until you're proven wrong. Assume the best. And that's going to lead you to the best outcomes, I believe. As far as the time of day, remember also that teachers are people. And so they have families of their own, and it's reasonable to expect a response in 24, 36 hours, but it's not reasonable, especially during the school day, to expect an immediate response. They're busy teaching kids. So just like you would not expect in your profession to have someone get an immediate response from you just because they sent an email, neither is that fair of a teacher.
I would think past a certain time of day too would be probably an unfair expectation. You know, I always think people are probably together eating dinner, and that includes the teacher. And then in the evening, usually that's time for them to kind of unwind and be with family too.
Absolutely. And so that's why I think email is a good way to make the initial contact and wait for a response. And they'll respond when they're able. And then if they need to set up a phone call, they'll do that. So I think that, you know, when we're making that connection, there is this great big divide. But really the thing to remember is that they're people. And to treat them the way you'd want to be treated. We think about the golden rule, right? Would you want someone to come into your office raging because someone told them something? And or would you want them to come and ask you about the situation and what happened? And so just treat them like another professional. And I think that guideline you'll find if you use the golden rule and treat them professionally, that you really can build a really great working relationship, and should make the effort to do that. Get to know them as people. And I think you'd be pleasantly surprised at what can happen in the relationship between you and the teacher, as well as your child and the teacher.
Yeah, great advice. Sharon, you are just, like I said at the beginning, you're a wealth of knowledge, and I just appreciate your time and your commitment, not only to this, but just to kids in general and their families.
Thanks, Dori. It is a passion. I mean, if we can, the more successful our families are, the more successful our world is, right? And so meeting the needs of kids and parents and families brings me great joy.
Well, thank you for your time today. I appreciate it. And I will include all your links so people can get in touch with you right in the same email.
Great. It's been a privilege.
Well, thank you, Sharon.